We're surrounded by digital learning tools these days. It's easy to take them for granted. But how did we actually get here? Well, it wasn't a straight line, that's for sure. We're going to rewind the clock to this really pivotal but kind of overlooked decade, 1985 to 1994. This was a time of, well, a lot of fear, a lot of friction, but also some absolutely incredible breakthroughs that really laid the foundation for everything we use today. So let's pull back the curtain on this forgotten but totally crucial decade. Okay, I want you to picture this. It's the mid-1980s. These big, clunky microcomputers are being wheeled into classrooms for the very first time. And for a lot of people, this did not feel like progress. This quote from 1985 just nails it. It felt like an invasion. Seriously, the arrival of this new tech wasn't met with open arms and excitement. No, it was met with some deep, deep anxiety. And look, there was a really good reason for all that anxiety. This number, it's just staggering. By the end of 1982, a full 90% of high school graduates in Australia had basically zero meaningful experience with a computer. None. So you've got these kids entering a world that's changing at lightning speed, and they are completely unprepared for its most fundamental new tool. The gap between technology and education, it wasn't just a gap, it was a chasm. So that brings us right into our first section here, the classroom invasion. We're going to dig into that initial shockwave these new machines sent through the whole education system, and maybe more importantly, what was going on inside the minds of the teachers themselves. And what's so striking when you look at these concerns is just how personal they were. I mean, this wasn't just about, oh, I have to learn how to use a new machine. No, teachers were asking these really fundamental questions about their own professional identity. How will this affect my status? Will students just learn from a terminal at home? Are schools and teachers about to become totally obsolete? This wasn't some abstract what-if scenario. It was a genuine gut-level fear that their entire profession was on the verge of disappearing. But right in the middle of all this fear, something else was happening. A really powerful new idea was starting to bubble up. It was this crucial shift in thinking, a move away from focusing on the machine, instead focusing on the person who's actually using it. And that new idea really came together in this brand new field, human-computer interaction, or HCI for short. You see, for the first time, the designers, they weren't just asking, what can the machine do? They started asking a totally different set of questions. Questions like, how do people actually think? How do they learn? And most importantly, how can we design the machine to fit the user instead of forcing the user to fit the machine? I mean, this was a revolutionary concept back then. This quote from 82 just captures the problem perfectly. Early researchers had this great analogy for it. They called it the tail wagging the dog. People were literally having to twist their own thinking, their own workflows, just to conform to the rigid logic of whatever machine was in front of them. So HCI, its whole mission was to flip that dynamic completely on its head. And this comparison here, it just illustrates that philosophical shift so well. So on the left, you've got the old way, linear programmed instruction. Think super rigid, totally controlled by the author, and honestly, often incredibly tedious. But on the right, that's the new goal, learner-controlled instruction. This is all about empowering the student to choose their own path, to focus on what they actually need to learn. The control was shifting, from the machine to the mind. Okay, so the ideas? They were absolutely revolutionary. But actually putting them into practice? Phew, that was a whole other story. And that brings us to the reality check. This is that moment when all that initial excitement slams right into the hard, frustrating friction of the real world. This timeline really shows just how slow and challenging this progress was. I mean, you see some promising steps, right? Satellite trials, government task forces, that's good stuff. But then look at what's happening in 87 and 88. You've got teachers basically crying out for more time for professional development. And this new concept pops up to describe the resistance, institutional immunology. Yeah, progress was definitely not a simple straight line upwards. And here's where that amazing term comes from. In 1988, an educator named Garth Boomer used this incredible metaphor. He basically said that educational institutions are a lot like the human body. They can develop an immune response to anything they see as a foreign object. And in this case, that foreign object was new technology. The thing is, it wasn't necessarily a malicious thing, It was more of a deep systemic resistance that was just born out of comfortable habits and plain old inertia. And we've even got the data to back this up. This is from some research in the late 80s using something called the concerns-based adoption model. Just look at this chart. That highest bar there, that's personal concerns. So at this point, teachers weren't even primarily worried about student outcomes. Not yet. They were still stuck on a much more fundamental question. Am I adequate? Do I have the skills to do this? It was their own anxieties that were the biggest barrier to moving forward. But you know what? All of this struggle, all this self-reflection, it actually led to the decade's most profound breakthrough. Designers and educators started to see the computer as something more. Not just a fancy VCR for delivering information, but as a true cognitive partner. A tool for the mind. And this is where the conversation got really sophisticated. They started talking about concepts like metacognition, which, simply put, is the idea of thinking about thinking, right? Like, how do we plan our own learning? How do we check in and monitor our own understanding? How do we know which strategy is the right one to use for a certain task? The big realization was this. To design effective learning tools, you first had to understand the learner's own internal operating system. And they didn't stop there. They broke it down even further into these key components. You had self-knowledge, so how you see yourself as a learner, and strategic knowledge, which is all about knowing how to learn. Suddenly, this wasn't just about programming a computer anymore. This was about trying to model the very structure of human thought. I mean, it's pretty wild.
And what's so cool is that this deeper understanding of how we think was perfectly matched by a new piece of technology, hypermedia. See, for the first time, information didn't have to be a straight line, like in a book. It could be a web, a whole network of interconnected ideas using text, images, even sound that you, the learner, could explore based on your own curiosity and your own goals.
This new way of thinking completely changed the design process. I mean, just look at these steps from 1993 for creating a navigational system. The very first step. It has nothing to do with technology. It's identify learning styles. The whole goal was to build systems that could actually adapt to the individual, offering different paths and different tools for different types of learners. It's a huge shift. Over in the corporate world, this thinking evolved into a whole new discipline called performance technology. And the people pushing this argued that, look, the goal isn't just learning for its own sake. The real goal is performance. Can the person actually accomplish the task? So the key question shifted from, did they learn it, to can they do it? And that change forced this intense focus on tangible, measurable results. And that brings us to our final section. And this is where we're going to see how the debates and the discoveries from this formative decade, well, they're not history at all. In fact, they are echoes that are still ringing incredibly loudly today. Just take a look at this comparison. On the left, you've got that raw fear from 1985, that teachers would be totally eliminated. But on the right, check out this prediction from just 2 years later. The idea was, hey, what if intelligent computers could handle all the basic cognitive instruction? Well, then that frees up teachers to focus on the uniquely human parts of education. You know, the affective, moral, and ethical stuff. Now, does that debate sound at all familiar? Because it's almost identical to the conversations we are having about AI in the classroom right this very minute. Way back in 1987, a writer asked this incredibly prescient question. He looked at older technologies, things like teaching machines, and he wondered, for all its power, would the computer just end up leaving a dent in the educational system instead of truly revolutionizing it? I mean, that's a question we are still grappling with today. What do you think? Has it been a revolution or just a dent? And check this out. Here's a concern raised way back in 1994, right at the dawn of the web. People were worried that a global technology dominated by one language and one culture, we're talking mainly English in the US, could end up threatening smaller cultures. This warning about a new kind of cultural invasion, well, it's only become more urgent and more relevant in our hyper-connected world today. So that leaves us with this final thought, right? The tools, they have changed beyond all recognition. We've gone from clunky desktops to actual AI in our pockets. But the fundamental questions, the ones we're wrestling with today, about the role of the teacher, the nature of learning, about equity, and the whole purpose of education in a technological age, these are the exact same questions they started asking back in that pivotal decade. The past, it turns out, really is the blueprint for our present.